Stanley Kubrick's filmography is, well, amazing, to say the least. But 1960s Spartacus is a bit of an outlier within his filmography. Although it was successful and a great film, it feels the least amount like a Stanley Kubrick film. And it was a film that gave him the hardest time to make, mainly because he didn't have as much control as he normally does on his films. Spartacus is just different from his other films, both in style and content. Where Kubrick's signature films often delve into complex themes of human nature, morality, and society, featuring ambiguous narratives and psychologically complex characters, Spartacus is much more of a straightforward narrative. It tells a heroic story of rebellion and freedom which, while epic in scope and imbued with moments of personal and political depth, it lacks the introspective qualities and thematic ambiguity of Kubrick's other work. Now, it does feel like a Hollywood epic of that era, but it lacks the visual and narrative precision that Kubrick is known for. Now, his later works would be noted for their innovative use of cinematography, lighting, and production design to create immersive and often unsettling atmospheres that reflected the psychological state of the characters. Kubrick's meticulous composition, camera movement, and pioneering technologies such as front projection in 2001: A Space Odyssey and natural lighting in Barry Lyndon set his films apart from the more conventional visual approach of Spartacus. This film, while a testament to Kubrick's early directorial skill, does not fully showcase his innovative narrative structures or deep exploration of themes that would become hallmarks of his career. Kubrick's style of filmmaking is often characterized by his absolute control over every aspect of the filmmaking process from beginning to end. But with this, he was brought into the film late and had to work under other authority figures like Russell Metty and Kirk Douglas. Though the compromises that he made on this project made him be even more controlling as he went forward in his career. Now, the original director of the project, Anthony Mann, was fired just a few days into production, and having worked with Stanley Kubrick on Paths of Glory, producer and star Kirk Douglas decided to bring him on to take over the reins. This is the first and only time Kubrick ever worked on a film that was already in motion. Now, this situation placed him at odds with Kirk Douglas, but we'll get back to that. The lack of control really started with the script. One of the most significant challenges that Kubrick faced with Spartacus is the lack of control over the screenplay. Unlike his other films where Kubrick had a hand in either writing or dictating or shaping the script to fit what he wanted, this was different. It was already written before he got there. The script was written by Dalton Trumbo and adapted from Howard Fast's book of the same name. Now, Trumbo's involvement was initially a secret due to his blacklisted status, which added an extra layer of complexity to the production. In fact, because of this, there was a moment where Douglas and the studio were trying to figure out who they would credit as the screenwriter, and without hesitation, Kubrick threw his name into the ring, which was a bit of a turnoff for Kirk Douglas. Kubrick's entry into the production came after the inception of the script and the production had already even started. Now, because of this, Kubrick couldn't really put his own taste into the screenplay, which sharply contrasts with the way he likes to work. That being said, if you listen to Dalton Trumbo, Kubrick had a huge hand in altering the way his script was portrayed on screen. Now, the real battle of wills came with producer and star Kirk Douglas. The two of them had completely different visions for the film, and they would often clash on the outcome, which led to a level of compromise that Kubrick was not used to throughout his career. See, the majority of Kubrick's films before this were self-produced, so he ultimately had the final say. The tug-of-war between Stanley Kubrick and Kirk Douglas during the production of Spartacus is emblematic of the power dynamics and creative conflicts inherent in Hollywood filmmaking, especially when strong personalities collide. This tension wasn't merely about specific creative decisions, but reflected deeper issues related to control, vision, and the filmmaking process itself. Kirk Douglas and Stanley Kubrick working on this film together would be the equivalent of Tom Cruise and Christopher Nolan working on a Mission Impossible film together. A strong-willed director with an actor-producer who's in control of the outcome of the film. Kirk Douglas was the driving force behind Spartacus as its producer. Douglas had financial and personal investments in the success of Spartacus. He wanted to combine a narrative filled with compelling action and rebellion and freedom. And him working with Kubrick before in Paths of Glory made him feel like he was the right person for the job. But Kubrick felt restrained by what Kirk Douglas had established before he got there. Douglas gave the project a predefined direction which clashed with Kubrick's desire to bring his own style to the film. To put it in modern terms, Kubrick wanted to make an auteur blockbuster like, say, a Dune Part 2, but instead he found out that he was working with a studio like Marvel that already had a vision planned out before he got there. Which, by the way, I made a video on how auteurs are now the new blockbuster directors. You should check it out. I think it's pretty good. Now, Kubrick, being Kubrick, wanted to have many takes, which he's known for, and that didn't really fly with Douglas. And because he was in control, he could say to Kubrick, knock it off. And Kubrick was like, bitch, no. Also, Douglas bristled at Kubrick's desire for more ambiguity. Douglas was used to the Hollywood star system where significant stars had a bit more input on the outcome of the film. This clashed with Kubrick's emerging auteur vision. Kubrick normally had such control over his actors, and this was different because the actor was also the producer. Ultimately, Douglas had the upper hand, being the more established artist. But Douglas wasn't the only person that Kubrick butted heads with. He also had issues with cinematographer Russell Metty. Kubrick was always known for the meticulous way he composed every image for his films. He had a very particular way in his mind that every scene should be lit, framed, and shot. His approach wasn't necessarily about aesthetic beauty, but using the camera as a tool to achieve a narrative goal. For those of you who don't know, Kubrick had a background in photography for Look magazine, and that background honed his eye for composition and lighting, which he brought over to the filmmaking process. Which up until this point, he was pretty much able to flex his artistic muscle without pushback. Only problem was, now he was working with a well-established cinematographer with classics such as Touch of Evil and Bringing Up Baby under his belt. Kubrick wasn't very collaborative with the image of his films.
Stanley set up a shot. It was a long dolly shot, specifically with a 25mm lens. I set it up and turned it over to Lucian and began the elaborate business of lighting and setting a dolly track and so on. And looked back sort of over his shoulder and noticed that the dolly track was much further away from where he had set the camera. He said to Lucian, I put the camera here, you're pulling it way back. He said, well, I haven't changed anything. I'm using a 50mm lens to give you precisely the same coverage that you've asked for. I've used the 50 because it makes my job a lot easier and it'll go a lot faster. Stanley listened to this and said, but what about the change in perspective that occurs? He said, well, that really doesn't matter that much. Stanley was aware that Lucian was simply bullying past him, but also what particularly nettled him was the assumption that he wouldn't understand this or wouldn't care about it. And Stanley said, put the camera where I told you, with the lens that I asked for, or get off the set and don't come back.
Now, Metty was older and an already established and accomplished cinematographer, and he didn't like Kubrick's very meticulous and specific details to image creation. And Metty was used to the more old-school Hollywood style of lighting that was a little bit less natural. Kubrick, always wanting to push the envelope, found himself at odds with Metty's more traditional approach. There were often conflicts about Kubrick's approach because Metty felt undermined by Stanley's suggestions and details. And there are many reports that Kubrick secretly did the cinematography himself. Now, I slightly doubt that because we know how Kubrick's films looked subsequent to this, but there were definite creative clashes between these two men. Despite all this, Metty won the Academy Award for Best Cinematography that year, and it was Kubrick's demands that led to this achievement. This experience showed Kubrick that he needed to get even more involved than he already was with the cinematography of his films. This clash had a profound impact on Stanley Kubrick's career. As time went on with his subsequent projects, Kubrick increasingly took on more and more roles that were traditionally meant for the cinematographer, such as operating the camera himself. But his collaborations with cinematographers like John Elcott and Barry Lyndon were marked with mutual respect and admiration of each other's work. Together, they pioneered both lighting and camera technologies, even though Kubrick had ultimate control over the image. This was in contrast to the issues that he had with Metty, which showed Kubrick's growth as a filmmaker, but also his ability to collaborate with cinematographers in the future, while still keeping the controlling vision that he was known for. The making of Spartacus was so different from anything Kubrick had ever done before and everything he'd done after, which really makes it stick out like a sore thumb in his filmography. Although he was controlling before, this film made him even more controlling of every aspect of the cinematic process. But it also gave him creative freedom to do that because the film was such a success. Kubrick has gone down as a legend, and he always will be a legend. And this film is a testament to the fact that sometimes conflict can create magic.